In this video, I'm going to run through the 10 two-color archetypes from the newest expansion for Magic the Gathering, Phyrexia All Will Be One. I'll cover the signpost uncommons for each and what cards you should be looking for to build a winning deck, starting with white-blue artifacts. The signpost uncommon is Cephalopod Sentry. For 2 white-blue, you get a star 5 artifact creature, Phyrexian Squid, with flying. Its power is equal to the number of artifacts you control. It looks like this deck can be built as a more tempo aggro strategy with cheap threats like Mandible Justiciar and Chrome Prowler, plus flyers like Flensing Raptor. After landing some poison counters, use the proliferate cards in blue to enable some of the powerful corrupted payoffs, like Incisor Glider and Distorted Curiosity. Keep in mind, all of the might tokens are artifacts, so Basilica Shepherd should be good here as a finisher and a way to generate more artifacts. If your deck generates lots of might tokens, Plated Onslaught will be a powerful finisher, and Tamiyo's Logbook is a great way to lend your deck some late-game inevitability. Up next is Blue-Black Proliferate Control. The signpost uncommon for Blue-Black is Voidwing Hybrid. For Blue-Black, we get a 2/1 flying creature with Toxic 1. When you proliferate, return Voidwing Hybrid from your graveyard to your hand. Now this card insinuates a more aggressive strategy, but as the name of the archetype suggests, I think the designers want this deck to be more controlling, playing the fantastic black removal in Annihilating Glare and Anoint with Affliction and Drown in Ichor, the good blue bounce cards like Surgical Skull Bomb and Serum Snare, and some card draw spells like Experimental Augury and Distorted Curiosity. This deck also has an incentive, like most of them, to get your opponent to 3 poison counters for Corrupted, using Toxic in black and Proliferate in blue to power up cards like Fleshless Gladiator and Vat of Rebirth, 2 great value engines to grind out your faster opponents. So if you're proliferating a ton, you could activate this a couple of times throughout the course of a long game. Use cards like Quicksilver Fisher and Cruel Grimnarch, or any bombs you're lucky enough to open to close out the game. Next is Black-Red Oil Sacrifice. The signpost uncommon for Black-Red is Charforger. For 1 Black-Red, we get a 2/3. When Charforger enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. Whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on Charforger. Remove 3 oil counters, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. The sacrifice synergies in this set don't seem to run too deep at common. There aren't many ways to generate tokens in these colors. Most of those are in white. We really need those to enable the sacrifice cards, and there aren't many cheap creatures with good when this dies abilities that you'd be happy to sacrifice. Successful red-black decks will likely just be straightforward beatdown decks with cheap aggressive cards like Barbed Batterfist, a 2-mana 3/1 that leaves behind an equipment, Fleshless Gladiator, and Chimney Rabble, a 4-mana 3/3 haste that comes with a 1/1 token, some good cheap removal like Anoint with Affliction, and combat tricks like Free from Flesh that gives a creature +2/+2 and leaves behind 2 oil counters. However, there is a steal card at uncommon, Awaken the Sleeper, that will be good with a cheap sack outlet like Annihilating Glare. Next is Red-Green Oil Midrange. The signpost uncommon is Cinder/Ravager. For 4 red-green, we get a 5/5. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each permanent you control with oil counters on it, has vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. This is the color pair that cares most about oil counters. As usual with red-green, nothing fancy going on, just beat down. Play efficient threats like Koldatha Cackler that gets stronger as you have more permanents in play with oil counters, Predation Steward that can pump your team, and Contagious Vorak. Ramp them out with Rustvine Cultivator and back them up with combat tricks like Free from Flesh that also dumps more oil counters onto your creatures. Oil Gorger Troll is a strong payoff at common for this deck. Evolving Adaptive, Armored Scrap Gorger, and Magmatic Sprinter are all strong uncommons for this deck that play well with the oil synergies. Up next is Green-White Toxic Aggro. The signpost uncommon for this deck is Slaughter Singer. For Green-White, we get a 2/2 with Toxic 2. Whenever another creature you control with Toxic attacks, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This deck can very much win by getting the opponent to 10 poison counters, since toxic creatures are heavily present in both colors, but the deck is also happy to just attack their life total. Play cheap toxic creatures like Crawling Chorus, a 1-mana 1/1 toxic that dies into another toxic might, Duelist of Deep Faith, and Branchblight Stalker, a 2-mana 3/1 with Toxic 2. Then enable their attacks with cards like Flensing Raptor and Adaptive Spore Singer, a 3-mana 2/2 that can either give a creature +2/+2 and Vigilance until end of turn, or proliferate. Push through damage with combat tricks like Complete Devotion, 2 mana for +2/+2 if the creature has Toxic, draw a card, and Titanic Growth, 2 mana for +4/+4. The green Skull Bomb is good here as the only way at common to enable Trample and push through the last few poison counters. The only other way to enable Trample is Volshok Battle Chair, and although it's expensive, it's repeatable and turns even a 1/1 Might into a dangerous threat in the late game. Porcelain Zealot to pump your team, Viral Spawning to generate 3/3 Toxic tokens, and Paladin of Predation with Toxic 6 are powerful uncommons for this deck. Next is White-Black Corrupted. The signpost for this deck is Vivisection Evangelist. For 3 white-black, we get a 4/4 with Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, if your opponent is corrupted, destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Like we've seen with some of the other color pairs, get our opponent to 3 poison counters quickly with cards like Crawling Chorus and Sheoldred's Headcleaver, and power up our corrupted cards, of which black and white has the most, like Anoint with Infliction and Zealot's Conviction, a 1-mana flash enchantment that gives a creature +1/+1, but if your opponent is corrupted, it gets an additional +1/+0 and First Strike. However, this deck can definitely get a poison kill with plenty of toxic creatures at common in both black and white. Chittering Skitterling is a powerful uncommon payoff for this deck, letting us turn our 1/1 mites generated by white into more cards. Next up is Blue-Red Oil Spells. The signpost uncommon for Blue-Red is Serum Core Chimera. For 2 blue-red, we get a 2/4 with flying. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on Serum Core Chimera. Remove 3 oil counters from it and draw a card, then you may discard a non-land card. When you do, it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, activate only as a sorcery. There are only 2 payoffs specifically for playing spells at common, Ichor Synthesizer and Sawblade Scamp, which both seem solid, but if you want a more dedicated spells deck, you'll need to pick up the uncommons, like the Chimera we just saw, Atmosphere Surgeon that can spend oil counters to give other creatures flying, and Trawler Drake that grows as you cast spells. So though there will likely be versions of Blue-Red that manage to pick up a lot of the premium uncommons, at common this deck will be a combination of creatures with oil counter abilities and spells that proliferate to keep the oil counters flowing. Many of the spells you'd want to play in blue have proliferate tacked on, like Mesmerizing Dose or Serum Snare to remove a blocker, while dumping more oil counters on a card like Forge Hammer Centurion that can remove counters to make creatures unable to block, or Furnace Strider that can give other creatures haste. And with Proliferate in mind, you won't need to cast 4 spells to turn on the Ichor Synthesizer, just 2 with Proliferate. Experimental Augury and Volt Charge as additional examples. The red and blue Skull Bomb should be good in this deck as well to trigger your stuff and provide an additional effect. Free from Flesh is nice here too, not only helping win a combat, but getting 2 oil counters and a spell trigger. Next is Black-Green Poison Victory. The signpost uncommon for Black-Green is Necrogen Rot Priest. For 2 black-green, we get a 1/5 with Toxic 2. Whenever a creature you control with Toxic deals combat damage to a player, that player gets an additional poison counter. And for 1 black-green, target creature you control with Toxic gains Death Touch until end of turn. This is the Turbo Toxic deck that wants to get our opponent to 10 poison counters as quickly as possible. Use cards like Branchblight Stalker, Sheoldred's Headcleaver, and Tyrannix Atrocity at common with high toxic values, plus Proliferate like Blightbelly Rat and Contagious Vorak to further spread the poison. Back them up with Black's Removal Suite and a combat trick like Titanic Growth. Of course, the Rot Priest supercharges this strategy, but the Paladin of Predation and Venomous Brutalizer are also great threats to help close games for this deck. Shoutouts again for the Maze Skull Bomb and Volshok Battle Chair as the only ways to enable Trample and push in the last few poison counters. Next is Red-White Equipment. The signpost for Red-White is Bladehold War Whip. For 1 Red-White, we get an equipment with 4 Mirrodin, so it comes in with a 2/2, and this is attached to it. Equip abilities you activate of other equipment cost 1 less to activate. Equip creature has double strike, and you can re-equip this for 3 Red-White. I'm not super high on this archetype coming into the set, but I could definitely be wrong. My concern for this deck is that the baseline cost for all of the 4 Mirrodin cards are just a bit too high. Gold Warden's Helm is a 2-mana 2/3, Mirrodin Bardiche is a 5-mana 4/3 Vigilance, and Volshok Splitter is a 4-mana 4/2, just all slightly too expensive. Now sure, you're left over with an equipment after the creature trades off, but the re-equip costs are so expensive, I'm not sure you're going to have time to spend your whole turn doing so when you're getting beat down by toxic toxic creatures. However, I do think having one or two of these equipment outside of the dedicated equipment deck could be nice to give a bit more power and a place to sink mana in longer games. Now at common and uncommon, I would be happy to play Barbed Batterfist, Hexgold Halberd, Hexgold Hoverwings, and Bladehold Warwhip simply because they are a reasonable rate for their stats, but notice 3 out of 4 of these are uncommon. You'll want to play as many copies of Bladegraft Aspirant as you can, because without these, I don't know if this deck can work. The good thing is those should wheel, as no other deck probably wants it. You'll also want to play creatures with abilities like First Strike, Menace, and Flying to get the most value out of your equipment. And for our last archetype, blue-green, Proliferate Poison. The signpost uncommon is Tainted Observer. For 1 green-blue, we get a 2/3 Flying, Toxic 1. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. If you do, proliferate. Play good rate creatures like Branchblight Stalker and Atmosphere Surgeon to get oil and poison counters in play, then use proliferate cards like Adaptive Spore Singer and Experimental Augury to proliferate and keep the oil and poison flowing. Oil Gorger Troll should be good in this deck to make use of your extra oil counters. Some powerful uncommons for this deck are Armored Scrap Gorger and Thrumming Bird. So you've got a good sense of what it takes to build a winning deck in All Will Be One. But now you've got to pilot it. Watch this video next where I break down the instants from the new set and what to keep an eye out for while playing your games. Or you can watch the full draft guide here. If you got this far, I'm assuming you learned a thing or two. It really helps the channel if you hit the like button down below, and please consider subscribing so you're notified when I release more limited strategy videos just like this. Thanks for watching.